Welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon, the podcast, where we dive deep into all things health and wellness to help you find health and healing inside and out for now and forever. Hello and welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root. I am Megan Abbott, owner and founder of the holistic health practice, Trifecta Collective, and welcome to the podcast here. So before I dive into today's topic of chronic pain, which as always, I'm so excited to dive into, and I have such a personal connection to this because this was really a big piece of why I got into the holistic health space in general. But couple like little announcements here before I dive into this. So the first one is the business is, we're doing some changes. We're doing a lot of things in the background. And if you saw on social media, my admin VA, my right-hand woman, was here for just a little over a month. And we've been talking about this, and we wanted to implement and start working on a whole bunch of things. And we have. And we're also changing directions on a few different things, and nothing crazy. We're still committed to helping people and working with people and helping people heal from chronic pain, and all kinds of chronic issues, gut issues, hormones, all the things. We're still very, very committed to that. And that will always be, at least in the foreseeable future, like a big piece of my passion and a big piece of the business. That being said, there are some other things in the background that we are just shifting and changing. And the whole goal is to be able to help and serve more people and help with education, help with actual implementation, and be able to reach more people. And so, yeah, there's a lot of I would consider big and very exciting things going on in the background here. And with changes can also come personnel changes. And so from here on out, unfortunately, Shannon is no longer with us. And I think she's an amazing person, an amazing practitioner. I have nothing bad to say about her. And it was just no longer the best fit in the directions that we're going. So from here on out, it will be me on the podcast. We're also doing a few things with the podcast. So last week and this week, it'll just be me and potentially for one more. And then you will likely start to see some guests on here. And I'm a little particular about who I would like to have on, but already starting to work on that. You also will likely see Andy. Once again, she's admin, VA, all things tech, anything that goes on in the background, all the visual stuff. I mean, she does just so much for the business. And she's been with me for over 2.5, we're almost 3 years. She was the first person I brought onto the team, and yeah, just like such a big fan. So she's going to be popping in on here too, and largely to help me stay on track. Because I do know that when I do the solo episodes, sometimes I can get my brain goes a lot of different places. If you're into human design, I'm a manifesting generator, and my interests lie in so many different things. And so sometimes I can bounce around a little bit. So having someone to help keep me a little bit more on track is kind of the goal with her. And she also has a ton of experience, a ton of background in the health and wellness field with herself in different areas than I do. And then I would also consider her an expert and really a jack of kind of all trades. So I'm really excited to have her on. You will see Brendan on for sure. And so, yeah, we just got some different things we're doing with this. So just wanted to acknowledge that. And the second piece of news is I've just been wanted to give a little update here. Been getting some questions about my partner and how he's doing and all the things, and just feel like we're in a good spot to be able to share an update here. So as of the recording of this podcast, he's done 5 in the next 2 days. So by the time this comes out, it'll be 6 rounds that he's gone through, which is half, which is so good. Such a good feeling that he's halfway through. And after his 4th round, he did do another PET scan, which is a major test that they use for detecting cancer and looking at how treatment's going and how his body's responding and all that kind of stuff. And by the way, I'm no expert, once again, in cancer. Reading PET scans, like that is not my area of expertise. And it was pretty obvious. And we've also had a meeting with his oncologist to chat about it more, and everything looked phenomenal coming out of that second PET scan that he got. So they were able to take out one of the four chemo meds, and we do think it feels like he recovered a little bit faster this round without that fourth one in. It still had a lot of side effects and all that kind of stuff. And we're managing through all of that. And it seems like he came through a day or two faster, kind of out of it. And maybe it didn't hit quite as hard as it had. So we were very, very excited about that, and also super excited to be about halfway through. So it is going about the best that we can expect. So, which I'm super happy to see. We've been passed on from our oncologist to her PA, which is always a good sign for me, meaning we don't need her level of care because he's responding so well. So thank you so much for all of the support and all of your thoughts and prayers and light and love and all the things that you sent, and we continue to appreciate that, and just wanted to say thank you because I've been getting some extra questions, I feel like, in the last week or two about that, and just wanted to let you know he's doing great, and it's super good. It was also very helpful to have Andy here for a bit, and she was able, obviously we did a lot of work stuff, and she was also able to help run some errands and do a couple things like that, just take a few things off of our plate, which just freed up some more energy, brain space, time to relax a little bit more. So all of that was super good. Okay, so those are the updates here. So let's get into the topic here. So chronic pain. So I have a lot of thoughts about chronic pain, as with a lot of other topics here, and I say this as someone who experienced it, someone who was already in the health and wellness space. I was already a personal trainer for about 2.5 years when I got in my car accident in 2017. And that is really what sparked my chronic pain issues. And I'll certainly share a little bit more details about my specific chronic pain journey here. But also, when I started this practice, this was more geared towards chronic pain individuals and looking at certainly the movement side of things, body function, body mobility, strength, equalness between the two sides. I was already in, a little bit of the trauma space. I wouldn't say too deep into the trauma space. And now I have many additional thoughts on trauma and chronic pain and even just our sensory to it, which I'll get into, and using the nutrition piece. And really it was just like holistic nutrition and how do we support, more anti-inflammatory diet, and how do we, start to address like potentially some bigger things that are going on within our bodies that it can impact pain levels. And I was noticing how my gut health was impacting the health of my back and how my back would feel. So all of these, the approach that I see to chronic health issues, whether that's like, once again, gut issues, hormone imbalances, skin issues, inflammatory issues, all of these things, it really comes down to the same, if not very similar, 5 principles that we really stand by and that I really built this business around. And that's looking at nutrition, lifestyle, movement, nervous system regulation / trauma healing, and then very targeted supplementation. So let me start at the beginning here. So I was a personal trainer. I was in the health and wellness space. I was doing group X classes. I was full-time in the fitness industry. At the time of my car accident, I was a personal trainer with a mobile personal training company. I think it was either right around this time or right before or right after this time that I was appointed as the general manager of this company. And I was also doing some group exercise classes around boxing, kickboxing, MMA kind of style thing. And no, I was never a fighter. And I learned how to kickbox and I learned how to box, and I did some certifications and some specialty training in how to do that. I worked at like a kickboxing gym for a bit, and as a coach and group X instructor, and then I also worked as a group instructor and then personal trainer, and taught a variety of classes, boot camp classes, boxing, kickboxing, and the boot camp were a little bit more up my alley. And then did some personal training with a UFC gym. And then I was also at this time preparing for a bodybuilding competition. So arguably, I was in the best shape of my life at this moment of my car accident. And I was lifting decently heavy. I had gone through a bit of an over exercising phase. I was probably still there, arguably still there, and definitely not as bad as I had been at certain points in my career. And I was eating pretty well. I was not super under eating. And where I'm going with this is I worked with a coach for a period of time in the bodybuilding space, and I was significantly overtraining, significantly under eating, and it was really impacting. So I was about a year after that where I kind of took over some of this stuff on my own and saw better results with doing this training myself and doing manipulations and not dropping. I was really not dropping below like 1,800 calories versus this coach that I was working with had me on like 12 to 1,400 calories a day pretty consistently with 4 or 5 days of strength training plus several hours worth of cardio. And I was a full-time trainer, or not a full-time trainer, but I was doing a lot of training. I was spending at least half of my days doing personal training at that point in time. So it was a lot. And while I lost weight and arguably lost some body fat, and I still have a lot of these tests that I have gone back and looked at and just kind of laugh a little bit about now. But I was coming out of that and just realizing that my body didn't respond super well to that. And my body was responding better to a little bit less exercise, a little bit different kind of work, also more calories, and just looking at my nutrition a little bit differently. So I was in a pretty good spot. And I was in this really minor car accident. I was working a lot at this time. This was the first day off I had had in like a month, and I was just, out running some errands and doing some different things, and there was traffic. I was stopped. Someone rear-ended me. And I am going to share a piece of this because it does come for me, I felt like it did play a significant role in that it was a very elderly gentleman who hit me. He was like 90 or 91 at the time. He was a prominent member of the community that I was living in at the time, and he definitely should not have been driving. And I did end up having a lawsuit with his insurance company and all the things, and won that. And I would have rather not go through that. And, it was a very much a learning experience. And that's really how I view it now. And so when I was in this car accident, so I got rear-ended, it was very minor, just by the way. Like, I really want to acknowledge that it was not crazy. He hit me going about 30, 35 is what the prospect looked like when they did the investigation and everything. And then I gently bumped into the car in front of me. And that was the whole situation. So, really starting that night, that was like mid late afternoon. That night, my lower back, really across the whole back, started to hurt, and it became debilitating very quickly. I mean, take your breath away. At many points in time, because I was still personal training, like I couldn't sit or stand for more than 10 or 15 minutes at a time without having to switch positions. If I was standing, like I'd have to sit. If I was sitting, I'd either have to readjust, like change how I was sitting, what I was sitting on, go to standing for just a little bit before switching back. Like it was a real mess. And I quickly ended up in the ER, and they gave me gabapentin, which, if you've had chronic pain issues, I'm sure you've been on. It really never, I went on it a few different times and never really did anything for me, never really took the pain away, especially because it was for me, it was very breathtaking. Like, it would literally like hurt so much, it would take my breath away. And once again, if you've experienced chronic pain, you may know exactly what I'm talking about. And so I went to the hospital, and they were like, "You're fine," and gave me just a couple days of the gabapentin to see if that helped. And things got progressively worse pretty quickly. And it it was rough. And some of this I didn't realize until after the fact, but I lost feeling in my right leg for pretty much a whole year. And it took me a bit of time to even realize that I no longer felt it. And the reason being, and this positive and negative in my circumstance, coming in with such a strong movement background, especially in the personal training world, especially coming from a bodybuilding standpoint, where bodybuilding is very, very focused on mind muscle connection. And if you've ever done bodybuilding, more traditional style bodybuilding workouts, it's very body part focused. It's very focused on symmetry, on very specific body parts. Like, yes, you're doing your whole body, and shoulders, back. I was going for physique, if you're familiar with the space. So like shoulders, back were a really big one, legs were a really big one, a small, very tailored waist is a really big deal, and there's a lot of ways to do that. Some not so healthy. I worked, once again, having worked in gyms, I saw a lot of bodybuilders come in, and especially women, seeing some of the things they did, and it's tough. It was tough for me then. It's way tougher for me looking back at some of the things that they were doing to their body, and just some of the damage here. So, but I because I could still connect to the muscles, I didn't have feeling day to day, but I was still able to connect to those muscles because I can look at them, I could flex them, I could feel them, be like, okay, no, I'm fine because I can feel them, I'm connected to them, I can move them, and we're good. But I did lose feeling in my right leg for about a year. I ended up with chiropractors and orthopedic doctors and orthopedic surgeons. I went through 8 physical therapists. I spent a good amount of time at a spine and pain specialist. With them, I was put on all kinds of medications and also had all kinds of procedures, starting from cortisone injections to nerve blocks and all these different things, because what they ended up finding, I did have an MRI done, and I had a disc protrusion L4, L5, or I'm sorry, L5S1. They did end up finding damage at L4S5 later on at the pain and spine clinic. And then, so yeah, this disc protrusion was going up. So it was like poking up, and then it was also poking out to my right side. So I spent a lot of time. I mean, I am going to assume at this point in time, I have no nerve endings in the right side of my spine and the lower spine from like L4 to S1, because they did so much work around this, because when the feeling came back in my leg, it then turned to pain. And really, yes, sciatica, but that is not how it started. It really started with like very significant sharp shooting pains all of the time, and then turned more into sciatica, which felt a little bit lesser uh, pain. Not that it felt good by any means, because if you've had sciatica, it's not fun, but turned more into sciatica and more nervy, kind of the tingling, numbness, occasional like shooting nerve pain, but it wasn't the same like sharp stabbing. Like it felt like someone was stabbing me down my entire leg, starting from my low back all the way down into my foot. I ended up with some ankle issues along the way. Along with that, I had previously sprained my right ankle, and my right ankle's never been the same. It's pretty good. It's very hard to notice the differences unless you're pretty well trained to look at them, because I've spent a lot of time, a lot of years trying to make sure that all of these things have been addressed. And it got to the point where no one had any more issues. They weren't going to do surgery on me because I was quote unquote too young. I wasn't even 30 yet at this point in time. And, I was seeing the chiropractor, I was doing dry needling and all of the manual techniques. And I was the person in physical therapy who did everything I was told. Plus, I did some extra things that I knew would be very supportive for my body. I was getting massages at one point every week, and then, every other week, and things like that. And I fortunately had a very, very good massage therapist who I had already been working with, just for general maintenance and overall body support. And it got to the point where they had nothing left for me. And they were like, opioids are the only option we have left for you. And that's really what drove me into the functional medicine space to start looking for some different answers. Now, I also do want to be clear. I do want to walk through physical therapy here a little bit because I think this is really important to understand and something that is not super well known. I feel like it is pretty well known among good physical therapists because I have had a lot of conversations with physical therapists about this. But I do want to go back to this piece, but all along, while all of this pain stuff was going on, there was also a variety of internal issues that were also going on, which also, looking at the bigger picture here, like I was so tired of dealing, all kinds of gut issues, and I started gaining weight and just chronically fatigued. Sleep issues got worse. My hair was falling out. I was really just, I was depression, anxiety were really, really high. And I was really struggling and internally and externally. So just want to be clear that it wasn't just one thing at a time that was going on. It really started with the back pain and quickly escalated to really systemic kind of issues. So before I get into kind of functional medicine approach and how I did start to heal and reverse these, and I'll say I have little to no pain in general now. Physical therapy. So I saw a lot of physical therapists, and with my knowledge in the personal training space, I had a little bit of a leg up kind of going into this. And, I did my best to try, and I was very anti-physical therapy going into physical therapy. And, I expressed my concerns with my orthopedic doctor, or my first one that originally sent me to physical therapy. And, they were okay. And really for me, it was just another learning experience in the Western medicine space and just not really realizing how the systems work. And so one of the big things for me that I got very frustrated with early on, and there was two of them here. The first one is my low back was hurting all across my low back. And no one wanted to look at anything else other than my low back. They did some mobility kind of testing with my hips and my ankles and things like that, and looking at, core strength and things like that. And what I quickly came to learn is that's how insurance works, is that if you go in with shoulder pain, they're only going to look at your shoulder. If you go in with back pain, they're only going to look at your back. If you go in with knee pain, they're only going to look at your back, because that's how Western medicine is. And that's how the system is set up. And we also know our body parts don't work alone. Just because I have low back issues doesn't mean my feet or my ankles or my hips or my mid back or my neck or anything else is also not contributing. And it took about 4 or 5 physical therapists for one of them to be open to look at some other things. And they started to look at, I was wearing a seatbelt, and they were like, okay, well, let's look at your diaphragm. Let's look at rotation of your upper body, your torso. And what we quickly came to realize is I was very twisted, and that I had a lot of where the seatbelt held me back. I had a lot of discomfort and tightness that was also contributing to my low back. So we started looking a little bit more of the body. I will say still not systemically at the whole body. And I had personal trainers who were working for this company, working for me at this time, and I was trying to consult with anyone and everyone that I knew, and we just happened to be running a series on chronic pain and corrective exercise that one of the other coaches was putting on, and I learned a lot. He had gone through the NASM corrective exercise specialty, and so I ended up going through all of that and found some decent answers. But it really wasn't until I found Mind Pump. And I know you've heard me talk about Mind Pump before. I'm such a big fan of these gentlemen and all the work that they've done. And I was a very early listener. I started listening around episode 500. And I have dozens of their programs. At this point in time, I'm a massive fan. I don't actively listen to their podcast anymore, full disclosure. And it's really just a timing thing. When I like to listen to podcasts, I don't have a ton of time to listen to podcasts anymore. And so I'm largely just listening to some comedy, something distracting, more distracting for me, and just lighthearted versus something a little bit more educational. Not saying I never do that, and I just don't do it a ton at this moment because it can feel very overwhelming with everything else going on in my life. So I ended up getting their Prime Pro. I actually have Prime and Prime Pro of their programs, and Prime Pro really they partnered with a physical therapist called Dr. Brink. I forget his first name, but he is great from everything that I've seen. I've never personally worked with him, but from everything that I've seen him talk on and all that kind of stuff, it was super great. I love the way he talks about the body and moving the body, and he's big on, okay, just because your ranges of motion are good doesn't mean everything else is good. I would compare him to similar to like a SWAT university kind of thing. If you're not familiar with them, they're also, once again, I forget the gentleman's name who runs that, but I think he is amazing and super great, just a wealth of information and really looking at total body mechanics, and which once again, we got to look at the whole picture here together when we're looking at healing. So I realized how much my feet and my ankles were really playing a role here. I realized how much internal rotation of my hips was playing a role and how the discrepancy of my internal and external rotation really was. Because here's the thing, because I was already very consistent in my movements and everything like that, my ranges of motion were quite good. And they were good in comparison to quote unquote the sick population that most of these physical therapists were seeing. However, they were not good for me, and they were not the ranges of motion with the ease and control that I was used to. And once again, this was a big red flag to me where, it very much reminds me of blood work, where, you can have quote unquote normal blood work and on paper appear totally quote unquote fine and still not feel that way. And it's largely because we're looking at these broad ranges, and we can say ranges of motion, lab ranges, whatever it is, that are designed for the quote unquote average population. And we know the average population is a sick population at this point in time. Wasn't like that, years ago, many years ago at this point in time, but that's really where we are right now. And so just because it's right for someone else doesn't mean that is my optimal. And that's what that program really taught me. And it taught me how to really look at and then start to rehab from a mobility standpoint. And if you've heard me talk about mobility before, mobility is active stretching. And biggest difference between active and passive stretching. So passive stretching, even if we think like a yin yoga, that I would consider that a very passive stretching. You're holding stretches, you're holding poses and sitting in them for a period of time. If we think about sitting on the floor and trying to reach towards your toes, you're stretching your hamstrings, low back is really kind of in there. You might get a little calf stretch, you might get a little foot stretch if you can reach your feet and start to pull those back. But you're just sitting in the stretch. And long term, while that may help you feel better in the moment, it's not really changing a ton. However, what does really change things is mobility or active stretching. And active stretching looks at increasing ranges of motion, so very similar to stretching. However, it's also increasing strength through those ranges of motion. So if we think of, actually, here's a really good example. So if we think of a pigeon pose, if we think of pigeon pose in yoga, you can just lay in a standard pigeon pose, and that can feel really good. It's really good for the hips, hip flexors, for the glutes, all that kind of stuff can feel really good. And now we can start to train that in an active form. And what that usually looks at is sitting in that stretch for 5 or 10 seconds and then backing off, and then another 5 or 10 seconds and then backing off. And every time you're ideally, hopefully being able to increase the range of motion. And because you're coming in and out of it, you're getting more strength through that. So that became a really big piece of where I was starting. As I was starting to, I like stripped everything back and I was like, all right, I'm gonna rebuild my body here. And I'm gonna start from the bottom up, start at my feet because that is the base of my body and work my way up. And that's really still how I view a lot of mobility work is working from the bottom up because our feet play such a big role in this. And no one seems to care super much about our feet and our ankles, which are the foundation of our entire body. And this makes a really big difference. So that when I started doing that and I started increasing ranges of motion, I started increasing strength through those ranges of motion, and then I started doing a lot of unilateral training to continue to increase because there is a limit from mobility work. I'm also going to say, and this is where physical therapy I think really lacks, is they will get you to certain ranges of motion and then you're done. However, where this really lacks is continuing to focus on maintaining and increasing strength through those ranges of motion that got us feeling better in the first place. And this is where I saw huge, blaringly obvious mistakes, not necessarily mistakes, in my eyes, they were mistakes of just Western medicine and its limited capacity to help people heal. And that's really what I was focused on. And I worked with people with a lot of back pain and knee pain, lower back pain, upper back pain, mid back pain, shoulder pains. I mean, you name it, I've probably worked with it at this point in time because this became such a big passion of mine because I was seeing so many mistakes and just like a lack of understanding of really how to do this. And another big factor for me, the last physical therapist that I saw was a physical therapist and a strength and conditioning coach. And I go, so I was still having some trouble and some pain with squatting and deadlifting specifically. So I was hoping for someone who could look at, once again, my whole body because it's hard to look at yourself, just like as a coach, as a practitioner, if I'm doing bigger work, like I want other people to be helping me out because I have a lot of blind spots when I look at myself. I can't be unbiased. I'm always coming in with some sort of bias. And so hiring someone out, I was like, this is going to be amazing. This is going to be great. And unfortunately, it was not. And while I did definitely learn some things from her, once again, this concept of it's all in your head came back. And I heard this a lot. I heard this from a lot of physicians and different kinds of doctors. I heard this from the spine and pain specialist. I heard this from a couple of physical therapists. And I refused to believe that. I just was like, I understand a piece of this could be in my head where there is fear coming up. 100%, I'm totally on board with that. And the level of pain I'm experiencing at certain points in time, it's not. It is real. And I don't care if it's not, I don't even care if it's not real. It is real to me. And I need someone who can listen to me and support me and help me through that piece as well. And once again, this is something that I know a lot of us here in the Western medicine space, when I had all my thyroid issues and was trying to get my thyroid checked, I heard, nope, it's all in your head. Do you want to go back on anti-anxiety meds, antidepressants because you were on them for so long? Wait, no, it's in your chart. We think this is really just the issue here. Once again, I refuse to believe this. And once again, I'm not discounting that some of this was not in my head because, yeah, of course it was trauma. Hello, if they had been mildly trauma informed, they would have understood this and not said, oh, I just think it's all in your head. And said it a little bit differently to help me understand how the nervous system and how the body really keeps the score. I've talked about the book before, the body keeps the score, and what I was really coming out of this. And I'll tell you that just because I had the same massage therapist for about a decade, before I left Virginia, I went and saw her when I was back in Virginia in November. And when we were talking, my sacral, just like my sacrum, the joint itself, we can also think about, how this corresponds to the physical, energetic, emotional type bodies too. she said this was finally able to release like very easily and actually stay released. And she didn't have to spend a ton of time on this. And while I was not experiencing pain before this, that was something consistently she told me, even right up until I left Virginia. And when I went back, it wasn't the case. And for me, that really confirmed that I was still holding on to some trauma around this accident. And I'm going to get into that piece here in just a not too long from now. And that's a big piece in how I got into the trauma space too. And that for me was a real testament of, leaving Virginia, leaving my life, making all of those decisions that I had to make last year or chose to make last year were 100% the right decision, and how much safer and better my body felt as a result. And once again, like the physical acknowledgement or confirmation of this from someone who had been working on my body for a decade, very regularly, very consistently, before the accident, after the accident, long after the accident, was a real testament to me, and confirmation that, yeah, for sure, the body keeps the score. And as we continue to heal the nervous system and heal trauma and release different things, how much it really continues to impact the physical body. Once again, I'm going to come back to this. So those all played a really big role here. And I got to a point where I could squat, I could deadlift, I was in minimal to no pain. And I was still dealing with a lot of the chronic internal kind of issues. Specifically, the gut issues were a really big thing for me. And I noticed anytime I was erring back on the side of constipation and my digestion just like wasn't the greatest, I'd have some back pain flare up. And that, once again, it took some time to put those pieces together. But once again, I was putting all of these pieces together of what all of the things that impact the physical body here and that can play a role in pain. And especially digestion, man, does this play a big, big, big role in back pain. I'll also say for over a year, I still saw a pelvic floor physical therapist. She is one that I did not fire because I did see a lot of value in her, and she never once told me that I was crazy or it was all in my head. And there was limited capabilities that she could do just because of my digestive stuff was so, so, so bad. I'll also say that if you have digestive issues, there's a very strong correlation here. And once again, it took me a couple years to put the all of these connections together, but we see a lot of people. I'd say bloating, abdominal bloating is one of the biggest symptoms that people come in to our practice dealing with and struggling with. And once again, one of the pieces why movement is one of our 5 foundational pieces is because movement impacts digestion. Digestion also impacts movement. And as I was noticing this within myself, and as I've healed, especially really healed my gut issues, and noticing how much that impacts my back, my low back pain, it became a really big deal for me. And what I consistently see with us, especially women who have had a lot of digestive issues, almost always we have some sort of back discomfort, especially if they're coming in not doing a lot of movement. And a big piece of this is if we think about bloating in particular. So bloating, the belly gets puffy for a variety of reasons. There can be waste, there can be gas, there can be all kinds of stuff just like going on in our belly, and that's why we're experiencing the bloating. But when the belly's bloated, this makes it nearly impossible to utilize our pelvic floor. And our pelvic floor are the deeper internal abdominal muscles. And I say abdominal lightly, it's really, I would consider the abdomen, meaning like front, side, and back. It turns off a lot of that. It really turns off our TVA, like a lot of the lower belly, especially if you have lower belly bloating, it turns off a lot of our ability to use those just because the bloating is so significant, which means that we can start to use start to develop some weird muscle patterns going on that are not ideal, not optimal, and can contribute to increased physical pain as a result. And if you do come from a history of bloating and now the bloating is gone, seeing a pelvic floor therapist, physical therapist, never a bad idea. If there is one person that I could recommend for someone post bloating kind of work and doing the deeper internal work. A pelvic floor physical therapist would be high up there. Say any sort of trauma therapist, pretty high up there too, just because I think that plays such a big role. But I also think the pelvic floor and restabilizing that, and clients who are interested, especially a lot of my personal clients that I've been working with for many years at this point, we've all done pelvic floor work because I understand the importance of it and the value of it and how big of a role it can play in just our overall health and our body feeling really good and staying that way. So I'm a huge fan of that. So that's a big piece. When our gut is inflamed and we have generalized inflammation, our body's more prone to just hurt in general. So working on inflammation, and once again, we have to look bigger picture here. If we're just taking basic anti-inflammatories, berberine, turmeric, those are probably some of the biggest ones that are out there. Yeah, if that helps, great. And is that something you want to be on forever? And that's something that you really need to think about is, and there, once again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's a very personal choice of if you want to stay on this forever and it's working, great. And acknowledge at some point it may not work anymore. Your body may get used to it and may require different things. That's a very common thing. We also need to think about this long term too. So do you want to be on the supplements? A lot of people go on restrictive diets to try and fix this, heal this. Say carnivore is one of the more common ones that are quote unquote very anti-inflammatory that I see a lot of people turning to. Which once again, that is totally your choice. That is totally fine if that's what you feel like, if that feels supportive for you, and acknowledge it wasn't designed to be a long-term kind of thing. And is that really how you want to eat for the rest of your life to feel good or feel okay? I don't know. For me, it wasn't. That wasn't good enough for me. And I wanted other answers, different answers, more longer term answers. And so once again, this is where I really got into more of the bigger picture, understanding toxin loads and gut overgrowth issues, and then kind of narrowing this in to understanding the bigger picture as to, okay, really, how do I help my body heal and stay healed long term? So yeah, nutrition can absolutely play a role. Focusing on good fats is a really good way to help with inflammation. Protein, I know I talk about protein all the time, but protein is so essential. You 100% need it, and most people do not get enough of it. And that plays a really big role too in inflammation, among so many other things. And that simple addition into someone's nutrition, it makes the biggest difference in our clients' lives right off the bat. I just hear it all of the time, literally from every client coming in who is not already, and we have a few clients that come in who are eating super well, great protein. Maybe they've already worked with a nutrition coach kind of thing, and they need some different kind of support, or maybe they're still working with that coach and once again, they just need some different kind of support. We play very nicely with the new nutrition coaching space because I don't love to focus on macros and building workouts. And yes, I can do all of that. And yes, I do all of that. And it's just not where my passion lies 100%. I like looking at some other things. So, yeah, all of that stuff plays a role here. And once again, you got to think short-term and long-term solutions. And once again, I know how debilitating chronic pain can be. It's not just a physical thing, it's a mental and emotional thing because you're thinking about it all of the time and then you're trying to distract yourself from thinking about it. You also have to think about anytime you leave your space, what this is going to look like. How long are you going to be out? What kind of support do you need? Do you need to bring some Advil, Tylenol, supplements to support you at, what's it going to look like coming back? Are you going to be able to eat? Are you going to be able to drink? Like, are you going to have to sit? Are you going to have to stand? Like, what is this going to look like? How is this going to impact your life? And that alone, that thought process of having to think about all of these things all the time is so totally and physically, mentally, and emotionally draining. It's very hard to describe to people who have never experienced that. And so I know the short-term solutions can be very appealing, and I will once again encourage you, think about also the long term and how you want to live long term. And especially if you're younger, and I'm saying younger if you're, I mean, even 70 or younger, you can still have a lot of time to live. And how do you want to live? What do you want your life to look like? And those are all things to think about. So, yeah, all of that plays a really big role here. I also, before I dive into the nervous system and trauma piece here, I also want to share just a couple of thoughts that I have. And once again, these are very Western medicine based, and I hear this a lot, and I do cringe. Just every time I have to have a conversation with someone about this, and I just like hurts my heart that this is so ingrained in our society. In that, as we get older, things just start to hurt. And that's just a part of life. That's a part of getting older. And by the way, I hear this from people in their 20s and in their 30s, not just people from 40s and up. And it hurts my heart that we have this idea that getting old is such a drag, quote unquote old. I'm just talking as we age. It's such a drag, and there's so many unfortunate things we have to deal with, and just our body starts to break down, and there's nothing we can do about it, and da, 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 da. That is real. I am firmly against that. Yes, there are 100% biological changes that happen as we age. I would say the biggest one for me from a physical standpoint is your recovery time goes down or goes up. Your body doesn't recover quite as fast from things in life. And I think a lot of this has to do with stress and just the amount of stress that our bodies are under, that physically, mentally, and emotionally. We just have a lot more stress as we get older. A 25-year-old with no family, no house, a decent job and some friends, and their stress isn't going to be the same as a 45-year-old woman with 3 kids who's married, works, and has a house, and has parents that are getting older, and thinking about all the stuff with their kids, and working on their marriage, and has been married for a certain period of time. And you always have to keep that alive and work on that and work through it. And how do you maintain friends as you get older, and you have to maintain your health and all of these things. It's just a lot. It's just a lot more on our plate as we get older, and that's okay. And if we keep up with our bodies, and I'm not talking extremists here, our bodies can still feel pretty amazing. And I know plenty of people who have felt better in their 30s, 40s, and 50s than have felt in their 20s and 30s. And that's because of choices that they've made. And especially around nutrition, around lifestyle, around movement, around the emotional and trauma pieces. And so I don't believe that we're destined to get old and frail and break, and we have to feel bad, and we have to be on all of these medications. And no, we have a lot of choices, and it's what these choices really look like. And something I think about, and I once again, I acknowledge I do not have children. Yes, I have a significant other. We have a cute little kitty cat that, if you're watching, is a little blurry, but is sitting in the background in the chair sleeping and is adorable. But I hear a lot of people, especially parents, talk about, what they would do for their kids. And I would die for my kids, and I would do this. And here's a question that I always think about. Okay, if you're willing to die for your kids and do all these things and make all of these sacrifices, what are you doing to live for your kids, and what kind of an example are you setting? And I'm talking basics here, because no parent's perfect, no human is perfect, and we're never going to be. And what kind of example are you really setting? If you're willing to die for your kids, are you willing to drink 70 to 90 ounces of water a day to make sure you're hydrated? Are you willing to try and get adequate protein and fats into your diet? Are you willing to get outside and take a walk 5 or 10 minutes a day? Are you willing to strength train maybe once or twice a week, whether that's in your home or in a gym? Or, I mean, that can look like so many things. Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to try and get some decent sleep so that your body has time to rest and recover and recuperate so they can show up? Are you willing to look at yourself and your own patterns and see what you might be passing down to them and give them the example of what it's like to be human and have emotions and learn how to process those emotions? I think about that all of the time, and having friends and seeing people with their children and all that kind of stuff. I think about that stuff all of the time. And once again, it's not about being perfect because none of us are perfect. And having multiple young children is a crazy life stressor. I mean, this a crazy life stressor. And yeah, there might be things you can't do or don't have time to do or incorporate consistently. And what can you do? And I think that goes a long way. And especially like with chronic pain issues, and I don't say just chronic issues in general, that takes a toll on you. And the capacity that you're going to have for other people, and I experienced this in my previous relationship when I was going through all of this, of you're not the best version of yourself when you're in constant pain and have these chronic pain issues. And so what can we do to be a better version of ourselves, to show up as not even a better, just a version that you want to present to your friends, to your family, to your work life, to anyone and everyone? And do you want to be very irritable and have very little emotional capacity because you're thinking about and dealing with these chronic pain issues all day, every day? And that takes a really significant toll on you physically, emotionally, let alone what's going on with your hormones, especially as women. So these are just all things to really think about. And then once again, like, this is why I'm so passionate about this stuff and why I think it's not just about nutrition, or it's not just, you know, you have mold issues or you have parasite issues or you have gut issues or you have trauma. Like, all of this stuff plays such a big role together. And how do we incorporate all of this so that we can heal and we can be our favorite versions of ourselves? Is to be able to show up when we want, how we want, and be able to do and live a life that we can enjoy. Not that we're going to enjoy all of it. And how can we find so much enjoyment in through so much of it? So I would encourage you to just think about all of that. Now, let's kind of wrap up on some of the more emotional side of things here. So, for me, my car accident, my first trauma therapist that I worked with, wow, she largely did hypnotherapy and we did some other things that I don't think I was quite ready for, the hypnotherapy part especially. And she did some more, yeah, did some different exercises that I don't think I was just quite ready for at the time. I think she was really great, and it was a very interesting introduction into trauma therapy, which after spending a decade plus in talk therapy was a totally different experience. But one of the things I realized from that was, one, how alone I felt. And not just in my chronic pain experience, but also in my life completely. And just how alone I felt. And I'll never forget, she did this exercise where it was imagining, all of your female ancestors, your mom, grandmother, and my mom was still alive at this point in time, like, for reference. And obviously there was a lot of complications with that, and just feeling supported and feeling that support. And anytime we did this, the first time we did this exercise, I cried so hard, just so hard. And that was, once again, like, a very real and first introduction to how alone I felt, but also realizing, we did some other exercises very similar to this, in how angry I was and how much anger I was really holding on to. And this gentleman that hit me and totally changed my life, man, I was beyond furious of just being your age and, wealthy and, being a prominent figure in the society. Just, why would you do this? Why would you risk this? And he explained to me he had limitations and when and how he drove. He only drove during the day, during certain hours, to certain places. And I was so mad. I just so angry that he did this to me, and totally, in my eyes, at the moment, around this time, wrecked my life. I mean, that's what it felt like. And I was so angry. And being able to start to process that anger, and I'll say anger is still a fairly uncomfortable emotion for me, largely because I just don't feel it. I'm a very even keeled kind of person. And does that come from a people pleasing pattern? Yeah, absolutely, in part. And the way I've designed my life, and who I've surrounded myself with at this point in time, I've done a pretty good job where I don't have to get angry. And once again, we all make mistakes. And I especially, talking to Andy and I have this conversation pretty regularly of just how understanding I am. And she's never made a mistake that I've gotten really upset about, that I've been angry about, because we all make mistakes, and she doesn't make mistakes very often. And occasionally, of course, things happen. We're human. None of us are perfect. And so, of course, things are going to fall through the cracks and slip, and, mistakes are going to be made. And it's just, how do we fix it? And that's a huge piece of life. And just like, okay, well, we have a situation. How do we respond? And how do we try not to react? Because reacting is an emotional standpoint that's largely based in trauma, versus being able to respond is being able to process this and not allow potential trauma patterns or trauma triggers, emotional triggers come up, and that lead our response. And so I've taken a great deal of time and effort to care for my emotional, energetic trauma bodies to not do that. And I'll say I've never been a very angry kind of person. I've always been a pretty, if anything, fawning was a big thing for me, and just very passive, shutting down, all that kind of stuff. Because of my experiences growing up with an alcoholic who was, yeah, wildly emotionally abusive, and I was always in the wrong and all that kind of stuff. So that for me, kind of like those moments of feeling incredibly alone, and realizing that, and then also acknowledging, yeah, how angry I really was, and how angry I felt, and how disruptive this was for my life. And well, I can look back now and be very grateful for all of these experiences, because they've all led me to be able to do the work that I do, and be able to relate and connect with people in such strong and significant ways because of my own personal experiences, that I can relate to a lot of things that they are often going through. And while it may not be exactly the same, I understand a lot of the pieces of the puzzle that kind of go into this, and all of the things, not just the physical components or the mental components, but really all of this, and how this can all relate to each other. So, I think acknowledging the emotions, are a lot of suppressed emotions, are traumas, and how those impact the body. And it's no surprise, especially with that anger and the frustration that I realized was coming up, my liver was not in the best spot. Not that I was drinking, I was not drinking very much at this time. Yes, I did have a history of drinking far too much at various points in my life, and for a good portion of my teens and my 20s. And I wasn't at this moment. And so being able to sit with that and acknowledge that, and still realizing how much pressure was putting on my liver. And once again, I can look back now and look at my liver enzymes, and yeah, they were elevated from a very, very young age. And, is that some of the trauma that was passed down to me from my mother, and the drinking? And she ended up with a liver transplant, and, all kinds of, she destroyed her own liver from the drinking. And was some of that passed down into my liver, because she, obviously she birthed me, and then she raised me, and I spent my whole life growing up with her, and all that kind of stuff. So I absolutely think that plays a role. And then I also think about, you know, other things that have played a role. Some of the bloating stuff for me, and even changes in my weight or how my body looks. There's the nervous system, the trauma, the emotional piece, in my eyes, plays such a significant role. Even with, I'll say like high bloating. So I had SIBO, and SIBO largely will present as like pretty significant bloating in the upper part of your belly, like right under your rib cage. And while this can absolutely be the whole thing, your whole belly, and mine was, there was extra pressure. I felt really extra tight in that upper part, and that's because of the SIBO. And I for sure think that, if we look at the emotional component of what can be held in the solar plexus, thing, a lot of things around identity, a lot of things around fear, around our trauma, around how we relate to ourselves, feeling comfortable with ourselves. None of that existed for me. And I held on to so much trauma. And once again, I did all kinds of gut work, and that helped. That helped with my back pain. But then also really starting to dive into the trauma piece. And as I was really doing a lot of healing work, I noticed that my bloating went down even more. And I was making no other changes for a while at this point because I was through a lot of my bigger, deeper healing work. And I was really just focusing on the mental and emotional side of things and the trauma healing side of things, the nervous system regulation side of things, trying to make my bucket a little bit bigger. If we think about, a couple episodes ago, and this stress bucket, and how do we make that bigger? That's a big piece of this too. And I also think, for me, no, can feel aches and pains for sure, especially when I haven't moved a lot. If it's been, during chemo weeks, typically it's a very long day on Monday. I usually only get one workout in for the week versus I like to have 2 or 3. That's where I feel best. Sitting more, sitting in the car more, sitting in the hospital rooms more, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I can absolutely feel it. Doesn't mean it's the same kind of pain, and I can do just a little bit of mobility work and it goes right away. So I also want to acknowledge that. And as I've done, once again, deeper and more of the nervous system regulation side, my capacity for pain and the level and time it kind of takes to feel that has gone up significantly. And I do attribute a lot of that to the nervous system regulation work, excuse me, because I just have more capacity. I have more capacity for all kinds of things, including maybe not moving as much as I would really like to. So I think all of that really plays a role. So that's really just a piece to touch on and acknowledge that if you are dealing with chronic pain issues, you absolutely also need to look at the mental and emotional side of things. And I also really think that a lot of us, and I absolutely have this myself, there's also a lot of trauma in going through this whole process, in being dismissed, and going through and trying to work with different types of doctors and practitioners and physical therapists and all of these different healing modalities, and these things not working or not seeing the results that you would really like to see. And there can be trauma in that too. So I also acknowledge that, if you've been through the system, and I talk about this with a lot of my clients who come to us who have spent many years already before finding us in either Western and or holistic type of health practices. And there's a lot of trauma in that too, and trying to find all of the things and not having them work either. And that's a lot to process as well. And I don't think this journey is ever done. I continue to do a lot of my own healing work in a variety of capacities. And I also think the psychedelic piece has played a big role for me in my pain journey. And also, obviously, as I've talked about many times before, in my emotional trauma, energetic, nervous system regulation kind of side of things too. And that has kept me and my body in a really good spot. So that's a good overview as a starting point. There's a few things that I didn't quite get to, and then talking about different modalities and I've tried a lot of different modalities in my time that I think I would like to get into more, but I think I'm going to save that for another episode. So if there's a piece of my own healing journey or healing from chronic pain you want me to dive into a little bit more, please let me know. Please let us know in the comments, and I'll put some ideas together for a part 2 when it comes to chronic pain. Otherwise, thank you so much for listening. As always, please like, subscribe, follow if it resonates. A 5-star review really, really, really means the world to us. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.